Hello and welcome to my studio. This can be quite a challenging subject for students because of all the darks. However, with practice, I am sure you'll be able to achieve a good result. Other areas that will require some thought and skill are this section here where we have some lovely light fringing around the foliage. The light in this subject is coming from the contrast of the dark trunks and branches against this very pale beige colour of the mist on the water. It's also important to include some of this filtered light because that helps transform what would otherwise be a very flat and boring shape into a more interesting shape that would help drag the viewer into your painting. I've already done the drawing for this painting, so we can get into the painting stage very quickly. I've kept the drawing fairly minimalist, meaning I've left a lot out. I haven't tried to put in too much detail. So now I'm going to turn this over and wet the back a couple of times. We're going to mix a lot of paint. We've got that dark in the distance. Okay, so the distance, the darker colour, we'll start with some French Ultramarine. And I'm going to go with some burnt umber in this case. I don't use it that often because normally I'll use French Ultramarine and burnt Sienna for these darks, but this scene has a cooler feel to it. Let's test it. That's not too bad from a colour perspective. Make this a little bit more blue. That's good. And then here, I'm going to mix the same colours, but lean it a little bit more to the brown. So not as much French Ultramarine and a lot more of the burnt umber. But not as strong in tone. And that's good. And then here we've got the light. Just so you know what I'm talking about the light. Here's these leaves of the casuarina plant, and then there's all this light coming through hitting it. For that, I'm going to use a mix of raw sienna, that will do. I don't think I need to add any other colour to it at this stage. And when you mix things like this, it's very easy to make quick adjustments when I start painting. But if I just started with these two and then had to mix this to drop into the underpainting with these colours here, things would dry too fast. So that's why you've got to spend a little bit of time getting these colours pre-mixed. this point, I've put that colour in and I look at it and go, is that too blue? And I'm looking at the photo as I do this, but I also have to allow for the fact that colours are going to dry a bit duller and I'm going to have a lot of paint over the top. I'm going to leave it like that because blue colours tend to recede and there's going to be glimpses of it into the distance. So basically, to answer my own question, no, that's not too blue. I think that's fine. So we can't go down too much further with this colour. This is the raw sienna. I'm just going to drop some of that in. Comes all the way over to here. And here I'll clean my brush. Keep your spray bottle handy. It really is very warm in here. I normally wouldn't spray this, but I want to keep this area quite, not runny wet, but enough that I can go back into it and make little adjustments. Clean the brush again. Clean it some more. Okay, now we paint the water. I'm trying to visualize the water without the reflections on it. So a little bit more burnt umber. It's better. We've got mist over some of this here, so I'm going to just get some water and lighten that. We don't have any sharp edges. So all I'm really painting here for the water is the lightest of tones. Make it a little bit darker here. But I'm not trying to make it as dark as that. After we do the trees and all that, then we're going to go over this water again. There. I don't want to go too dark, otherwise when I come to do the water right at the end, I won't be able to capture some of this light. Okay, so now I'm happy with that. But I want more light here. I feel this has come down a bit too much. I'm going to turn this around. And to make it easy for myself, I'm going to take my photo and rotate it. I'm going to just drizzle some water in there, here. I'm really now just concentrating on these light areas. And that's pretty good. Don't want to overdo it or I'll end up damaging the paper. And now here, this is a bit darker than what I would like, so I'm going to get the tissue and just very lightly scrunchel it. I think scrunchel it's a real word. Mainly in where the foliage is going to be. You have to keep turning it around. And here we've got some lovely light there. This is okay. I'd like this to be a bit lighter here. Main thing is you don't want a really sharp delineation between the background and the foreground, meaning, you know, this is mist, so it's not going to be a dead straight line. Then a little bit here. All right, I think that will do. A little bit of light here. You know, the top layer is fairly dry. If it was any wetter and I did that, I would drag some of the paint along. The paper is still very cool underneath. I think I'm still going to just hit it with a hairdryer just to take a little bit more moisture out. Hopefully I won't take out so much that I have to re-wet the back. I'll just see how I go. Let's mix some of these colours. We've got the trunks, which are a dark, not quite black, maybe a hint of brown in them. And then the foliage is a dark deep green with some variations in it, but we need a lot of it. Basically, we've got a dark shape here and then even more darks here. So you can't be too timid with how much you mix for this. We've already got some colours there that we can work with. And here I want a bit more of a brighter green. So if we look at our reference, the green stands out a little bit more here, and I've kept the raw umber mix, which I'll use to create some hints of this light coming through. Let's look at the trunks. Lots of French ultramarine and lots of burnt sienna. And we'll test it. You see how dark that looks, but look how light it is. So you get your brush, take about 3/4 of the paint out, lightly press and drag it across. So you can see how much darker I have to make that. And you can see now why it's so important to mix your colours at this point, right? If you had to stop partway through your painting and spend all this time to mix the right tone again, the paper would just dry too much. A bit more brown. And then here, I'm going to use lots of French ultramarine and burnt umber. Lots of burnt umber. But this is the foliage, and the foliage has just a slight tint of green to it, so I'm going to add some Aureolin. I'm going to put a little bit of burnt sienna in there as well. And at parts I'll be using some of this and some of this together for the foliage. And then we've got this dirty raw umber. Sorry, raw sienna, which we'll use for some of these leaves. Why I say dirty, because some of that mixture there has come into this area, and I don't mind it. It doesn't have to be a bright raw sienna. I might make it a little bit thicker. So that will do. And there's a few hints of brighter green, but I don't need a lot of that. So let's just mix a small puddle here. Just some Aureolin and Cobalt Turquoise. And that'll do. Great. You're going to need a fan brush for this as well to help create some of these effects. We'll start with the trunks and branches first. So let's start down here. And you put that mark, and it's at that point you go, is it too dark or too light? And you don't paint anymore, you go back and adjust it. If you're happy with it, then you can continue to paint. I'm happy with it. There's some light down here. Leave some gaps. get my rigger. If you're painting a branch like this and you find it looks a bit boring, then put extra little bumps and things in it to make it more interesting. This line here is horizontal where it hits the water. Good. You can't see much of this other trunk. And then it gets very dark down here. That's all we can see of that. Now I'll go in with some of the foliage. Back to my fan brush. You don't want your brush drippy, so I'll take some of the moisture out, especially when I'm trying to create some of these finer lines, right? But you have to do it while the trunk is wet. I'm going to go with some cleaner raw sienna and it should mix with the other colours. I don't want it to be too bright. Change the angle of your brush, not trying to paint a lawn. Okay, now I'll go in with the green. And I'm mixing some of that dark green with some of this colour here just to give me a bit more of a gradation. And you can't press too hard here. If you press too hard, you'll lift all the paint underneath. It's a very light touch. Now, go back to my rigger. It's got a few branches in here I still need to put in. Sometimes I'll paint up to some foliage, lift it, and then drag it. Other times I'll paint through the foliage. And that's probably good enough for that tree. And you'll see how I picked up some of that paint, grabbed a bit from here, just to give some variation. Even though the dark colours, it's not just one big flat wash. Okay, I'm looking at the edges. I want to get the edges right, but I also want to come in and throw a bit of foliage around these trunks fairly soon. I'm looking at the photo and seeing where there's some bright colours, bright shapes, and really just trying to capture the feel of this scene. Sometimes I'll pick up paint straight from my palette, because here I can see some of these leaves, see a bit of colour in them, and because the trunk is still wet, you can see how if I go into that trunk, even though it's dark, a little bit of that brightness stays in there. It's important to leave these little gaps in the foliage. Got this edge pretty right here, quite happy with that. Let me do something with these trees before they get drier. So there's a dull browny colour here, so I'm just using some raw umber, not too much water on my brush, plus whatever other colour was already on my brush, so that was automatically dulling these colours. Pick up a bit of the orange, maybe a bit of water. And then I'll go back to my rigger. Sometimes I'll just dab with the fan brush just to add a bit of texture. And there's that little bit of light. If we look at the photo, I'm keeping an eye on that pattern there and up here, because the rest I can go in with really dark paint. Just going in with a really big brush now just to lay a lot of paint onto the surface. Pick up some of both these dark colours. I know it looks weird at the moment, but I'm going to go in with my fan brush into the wet paint in the section just to fix those edges. do. All I'm trying to do is to create a mass of different foliage shapes up here. Just hints of these, going quite thick paint. It's better to leave too much light than not enough. You can always remove it like I'm doing now. Now I'm just going through and getting rid of anything that doesn't quite look right. While this is wet, I'm going to finish it off by putting in these reflections now. If you have lost all your lights, there's nothing to stop you coming in and using your fingernail to extract an extra light. Don't particularly need any extra lights. You can turn that into a branch. And the other way to get light back is if you have lost all the light in an area, you just get your brush, clean it, and let's say I wanted this to be a bit brighter. You just lift very lightly. So you need a really thirsty brush. Don't scrub and push because you'll damage the paper. These are more just hints at shapes. Okay, let's do the water. All right, so now in this case, because primarily we're going to be laying in some soft edges, what I'm going to do is going to get some clean water and run that along here. And then I'm going to wet all the way down to the bottom. Now, this is just getting to the point where the back needs some more water on it, so I might just wet that. Take this opportunity to do that. Don't want it super sloshy wet, however. Yeah. And I've got this brown. Remember, the water is a slightly brown colour anyway. So we're going to drop some of that in. Let's let that sit there a bit. And I've just got to adjust this area here. Just soften some of that. I'm just going to hint at this shoreline, right? You can't really see much. See a branch here, just a hint of it. We've got some good light coming through here. Hopefully this is dried enough. Yep. There's some light coming through. Just going to give that a light spray. Lift a little highlight there. This is one of those paintings where you just got to start and keep painting. While I've got a reasonable amount of paint left, by having all that paint there, it made this painting so much easier to do. If you try and go too cheap on the amount of paint you mix, you'll really struggle with something like this. These sort of things are very hard to teach people. And what I mean by that is, it's not like I can say, now at this point go in and scrape that, because you may not need it in your painting. It's more to be aware that there are some of these techniques that you can use. I'm just going to get rid of a little bit of this light. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so, and hit the notification bell so you'd be advised of each new video I produce. And if you are able to, please consider supporting me on my Patreon channel. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.